This week, Kyla and I were invited to Government House. It was my first time ever being in that rather spectacular mansion with its beautiful gardens and its sumptuous interior. We were there as the guests of Dr. Brady-Quinton. Well, I guess we were all the guests of the Lieutenant Governor, weren't we, Janet Austin? She was actually the first person to speak in our gathering, which was for Transgender Day of Visibility. And it's an important day, and Dr. DeVere is the current chair in transgender study at UVic. It's an importance about being visible and having allies. It's also stories of courage and the need to be safe. I know I speak for us both when I say we were impressed by the courage we saw on display. So they have a clear vision to which they are working, where all trans and gender diverse people would be free to thrive. But in the news, of course, we're always bombarded with the vulnerability of the trans community. It seems coincidental, doesn't it, that this week's title for our program from Dr. McPhee is We Are Fragile. Some parts of our society bear that fragility even more so than others. And so living out their mission to be inspirational, we heard from some of the people who had graduated from that program and were part of the allyship of that program. It was a wonderful opportunity for me and for many like me to learn firsthand stories that I had really never heard before, and to cheer on people who are living lives of amazing courage and vision. I don't want to make it sound like it was a dreary event. It wasn't. It was a time for us to meet people we'd never met before, with much laughter, telling stories of tremendous transformation and support from communities. And so it was an opportunity for us to have our trans flags, which they gave us, which are on the front right now, and to remember the families that are supportive. Some of them are families of choice. The children, the parents, the grandparents, the neighbors, people they have met on Zoom, who have been allowing themselves to open their hearts and arms and wear the visibility that allows others to feel safe. And so I came away recommitted to the work we're doing here in Affirm, to becoming an affirming congregation that allows us to support people like Dr. DeVere, who's an internationally respected scholar. His work has been translated into, I think, 12 languages, we'll say that, it may be more, and who is internationally regarded and looked to and consulted in this very important academic field. And it's just one more way in which the world is catching up with some of these amazing young and older people. There was actually a boomer who spoke. And so it's moving history forward. And I was grateful that we got to be included in that event. And I wanted to share it with you. It's March 31st of every year. And maybe next year it will be something that we can do as we gather as a congregation. I wanted to start my sermon sharing that piece of news. And so we turn to this wonderful story. Jesus spoke the words nobody wanted to hear, which is the words that he wasn't going to always be around. And it wasn't spoken by anybody in hostility. It was spoken by someone who loved him, and then he acknowledged it. She spoke in actions, Christ spoke in words. We are fragile. It's a hard thing for most of us. We have more past than future. It's a funny thing. We're closer to 80 than 40, most of us, I think. And so what's the point of that? Well, the point is from a spiritual point of view that we recognize and live in that fragility, that thing called a lifespan. And we know that every day is a gift, and how we live it marks one more chance, as Blaine shows, to create a legacy. I don't know how it was in your family, if this is something you talked about. We had a couple of cardinal rules. Maybe some of you had them too. Speak no ill of the dead. Unless it was somebody we all agreed we would speak ill of. Then it was fair. But if you were critical of somebody else, then that would come up. My own mom, whom I had a very close relationship with, would never discuss even a sermon for her, a service. Would you like a particular hymn? Was all interpreted as hers. Oh, you want me dead. Now, when I was a teenager, I would have answered that differently. But I was already old enough to say, no, I don't want you dead. I just want to do the right thing. And then I would tell her the hymns I would choose if she didn't choose any on her own. But it is about admitting our vulnerability, and that's a hard thing for us, whether it's about choosing hymns or what we want done, or understanding that every day, which may of course be our last, we are creating a legacy. And can we do that in increasing comfort because we are people of faith? Can we talk about that with each other, with our loved ones, with ourselves? I think there are some advantages to being able to talk that way. There are some advantages to being able to talk about the fact that we have a limited time span, and help our children to know that from the very beginning, that it's not just when we've received a diagnosis or news. So it's an opportunity for us to not just be okay with the fact that we have a lifespan, but to be very comfortable with it. To know and respect that we have limits, that we all have limits. Sorry, I've moved away. Our vulnerability, the vulnerability of those around us then doesn't become a shock, right? It still becomes bad news sometimes. Of course, like our threshold moment said, sometimes lives are far too short. Sometimes questions are far too numerous. I saw a very interesting presentation by a University of Minnesota, a professor, saying that the press says we want closure after death. And her hypothesis is we don't want closure. Closure doesn't happen like that. We're given closure. Closure is that unfolding of the new chapter, however that takes, and it is a slower process. She said she thinks that when the press says, I hope the family gets closure with this revelation of what news they found or a sentencing, she said they don't want closure, they want certainty. I thought that was a very interesting distinction. We do yearn for certainty, don't we? And of course, because we're fragile, we don't always have that certainty. And so, when we know that we're fragile, when we're even slightly 2% more comfortable with it, I believe we're more help to others in grief and our own selves in grief. You know, when you look at teenagers in their first major loss, it's the first time they've felt that inside them. They don't even know how they're going to do it. And I'm sure that, like you've just ached for them. But as we grow older, we know how it is for us. We know what it's like to be in grief. And maybe like Mary, my goodness, she responded in an extravagant gift of love. An amazing thing. I was sharing with the chapel congregation my memory of a movie long, long ago called Babette's Feast. Do you remember that? All that amazing money, that beautiful course after course. And was it wasted on those people that ate it? Was Mary's perfume wasted on Jesus' feet? These are questions each one of us answers. For some, of course, Babette had made a foolish choice. For others, she was an amazing blessing and a continual challenge for us going forward. What would we do that would be an extravagant sign of love? It doesn't need to involve money. Mary spent her life savings on that moment of love with Jesus. Babette spent all she had. Those are two examples that are both financial extravagance. But there were other kinds of extravagance. I remember early in the pandemic, and you might too, opera in Italy. Do you remember hearing that opera singer? Remember him on the balcony every night? That's extravagant love. Also given to strangers, shared with us. We've seen many such examples during COVID. So I have a couple of blessings from Kate. And she says this: "Blessed are you who are attempting to love what is here, what is now. You who recognize the wonder and pain of looking at life's rearview mirror, at those things that are gone. The person you were, the quickness and sharpness of a body that doesn't tire quite as quickly, the relationships and jobs and aspirations, the people you can't get back. Blessed are you, holding the gentle compassion that wraps memories in grace. And blessed are you, turning your gaze from imagined futures that seem to call out with an unnecessary pressure and an urgency that wants to rob you of what joy still exists. Oh, and how blessed are you, drawing a tidy boundary around today and calling it home. For yesterday is a memory, tomorrow a mirage. Blessed are you, recognizing that the right sizing of reach and possibility is the heart's ease of God's good counsel, opening your eyes to all that is here. Let its beauty seep into your pores and whisper words of peace. Receive and welcome reality in its completeness, giving over to God all that is beyond your power to change or understand or return to once again. And in the meantime, embracing and loving the life you have, the family you have, the pleasures that are yours right now. Amen.